What was that?
It's the Crypt Keeper.
Oh my god. The Crypt Keepers, right? I thought I had Bookshelfstud. Oh boy. Oh boy.
Bookshelfstud, more like bookshelf blood.
Why is that not your Twitter name?
Yeah, that's a great
Twitter name.
I don't participate in
You don't
in
do
Twitter.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Maester Monthly. No, is that
wrong
that
show?
not?
Wrong show.
Shit.
This is not Maester Monthly.
Okay.
This is in fact. Wait, what did I title this?
Who knows, man?
Not me, because I messed up the.
What series are we even talking about today? Who knows?
Maybe Lovecraft, like some part of Conan the Barbarian, Warhammer 40K. Dude.
You know. I'm thinking Red Sonja is going to make an appearance today.
That's one of those times when I read the document and I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm sure it would be cool.
It's a comic book that I read once. Never mind. We'll get to it later.
Yeah.
That's
Red Sonja. That's the one with the.
Yeah, it is.
The
yeah.
How's it going in the chat, everybody?
Yeah, should we introduce what we're going to talk about?
So this is last year for Halloween. It was me, Sandrixian, and Shakespeare Thrones talking about witches. I decided to switch it up because it was actually supposed to be the Night Fort with me and Michael and Sandrixian.
That's
but
right.
The witches thing was so good and Shakes is awesome. So you guys got bumped. That's what happened.
Yeah, and I know it's okay. It was worth it.
I mean, I see you all the time.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
But for this year, we're taking another journey into a very spooky, kind of haunted, full of zombies, hallucinogens, weird pink little men of some sort, and for some reason, the phrase "worrying on nipples." That's right. We're talking about the House of the Undying tonight.
Thunder crash. Yeah, trains dragging. Yeah, good. Halloween sound effect CD.
I, of course, am Matt, also known as JoeMagician, and tonight I have an awesome costume for you.
Yes, you do.
So, obviously, I have a George R. R. Martin hat going on. I have a nice full Kit Harington.
You got your Jon Snow furs.
I got my Jon Snow furs, which was called Warrior Furs.
Oh yeah,
right next
Spirit
to the
Halloween,
dragon
baby.
Princess costume.
That's right.
And dagger.
Nice.
So this Halloween, what I'm dressed as is George R. R. Martin, as the original prequel was announced, The Long Night. Where yes, I am definitely all about House Stark. I love the others. This is going to be a great show. And then underneath, he's repping that Targ pride. He was just waiting. He was just waiting for Fire and Blood. No turtle pin, unfortunately.
That's right. Under the furs, the bitter Targaryen banner. Doesn't quite work.
We know he's a Targaryen at heart. They're his favorite family. He wrote an entire book about them. All you got to know about the new prequel versus the last one is ain't no history of the Starks coming.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good costume.
Yeah, inventive. I wish I had turtle pins to put on it.
Yeah, people are asking in the chat already where your turtle pin is. So
hang on.
Hang on.
Next year.
That's right. That's like the next Patreon tier.
Yeah, next Patreon tier is turtles. And of course, joining me is my Maester Monthly co-host, Michael, aka Bookshelfstud.
Hello, everyone. I'm also this stream. I am a member of Michael Jordan's crack basketball team here to defeat the Monstars. That's right. I'm repping the Toon Squad. The Toon Squad jersey. I'm here to stop the awful creatures from outer space, from the moon.
Wow, that's very Lovecraftian.
Basketball meteors that they're shooting at us or whatever. I don't know. I don't really. Michael Jordan wasn't very clear on what I'm doing today, but he told me to be here. This live stream is actually sponsored by Air Jordans.
Incorrect.
That's incorrect.
No coupon codes for you guys.
That's right. Oh man. Sorry.
Yeah, this was actually suggested by my Patreons I was thinking about doing a Halloween thing. What did they want to hear about? And they said House of the Undying, so it seemed like a good idea to me. I hadn't really I hadn't really thought about it in a long time. It's kind of a crazy, very short chapter, only like 9-10 pages or something like that in the crappy paperback version I have. And there was a lot more than I remember, especially because they cut it down for the show quite a lot. They changed the visions significantly. Probably some of them for the best. Like some of those I was like, what are you doing, Martin? Do not do these.
Well, and it's really one of all of the places in the books where you see the gap between like how easy it is to write something crazy and how hard it is to film something crazy. Definitely the House of the Undying.
That's up there.
Yeah,
I figured before we get started that much like Daenerys entering it, when Pyat Pri forces her, says you drink the shade of the evening, or you don't come in. So I have my own shade of the evening. My own blue drank.
Blue drank.
It's Bacardi Hurricane. So this is going to be sugary.
Yeah. Would you mind? Let's see. Can you pour a little bit of that into my cup here?
Yeah, sure.
Just here. It's right next to you.
There
you go. A little lower.
Right?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, right to the brim. There you go.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Right at your baby.
Great. Woo. All right. Should we cheers at the screen here?
Cheers.
Clink. That totally works.
Try again.
Okay.
And cheers.
Cheers.
There we go. To the shade of the evening.
That's right.
Robert's here. In Deep Geek, Anthony.
Hey.
John Webster. There's a lot of awesome.
Yeah, it's a murderer's row.
There's a murderer's row in this chat tonight. You guys are crushing it.
To you. Are we chugging it, by the way? Is that we're pounding this?
Yeah, we're pounding this.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
We got to pound this.
Let's knock it. All right.
Now that I'm good and fucked up on blue drink.
Yeah. Woo. Thanks for the blue drink. Yeah.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to share it because this is a giant bottle.
Yeah.
I don't want all of it.
You going big there. That'll be at Con of Thrones 2020.
This is what they had. A super chat here from Steven Stark, Patreon as well. Thank you very much, Steven. Really enjoyed last Halloween stream. Hopefully this yearly custom will become an annual tradition. I don't see why not. There's enough spooky things in A Song of Ice and Fire that you could do a stream. Oh, how does it taste? It doesn't taste good. In fact, hang on, let me
Mine kind of tasted like Drogo's seed, if I'm being honest.
That was one of those parts where I was like, what is this?
With a little dab of mother's milk.
Yeah. Let me get the whole...
Yeah, please.
You know what? This is actually a good place to start because it is a very... it actually starts with the outside of the building, describing it, where it is, what's around it. And considering it's Karth, it's actually very, very strange, I would say. It's like, So Karth is in the middle of a desert, obviously, outside the Redways. Oh, I got the quote here. So Dany raised the glass to her lips. The first sip tasted like ink and spoiled meat. Come back to that one. Foul, but when she swallowed, it seemed to come to life within her. She could feel tendrils spreading through her chest, like fingers of fire coiling around her heart. That sounds like whiskey.
Yeah, actually, that's
kind of what it feels like. On her tongue was the taste of honey and anise and cream, like mother's milk and Jogacy.
Yeah, baby.
Like red meat and hot blood and molten gold. That's a hell of a drink.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, it's like the what's that drink from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
The Gargle Blaster.
Yeah, the Pangalactic Gargle Blaster. That's right. Yeah, nailed it.
Got that one.
Yeah,
and super chat here from Maura Lee. Thank you very much, Maura. Happy Halloween to all. You both look very handsome in your costumes. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
As in my Gurm regretting the Long Night prequel costume.
Yeah.
This is sort of going to be a running theme from our notes. And by the way, patrons, if you go to Patreon right now or the Slack, the whole outline is there for you to follow along. But this is really, really creepily similar to what happens to Bran. When he drinks the weirwood paste, which nobody thinks is paste, it kind of tastes very, very similar. It's kind of gross, and then it sort of makes him... He tastes like things that remind him of home, things that he really likes, even though initially going like, this is disgusting.
Yeah, for sure. It's the sort of like all-encompassing senses attack, right? Like it's just the idea is it's overwhelming your senses. I think it's really interesting too, the things that, I mean, Mother's Milk and Drogo's seed is worth a snicker, but also it's like, it does speak to the idea that this is some sort of very like primal, natural thing that it's touching on. It's not artificial necessarily, or it's not like, I don't know. It's not described like drinking.
That's
Coca-Cola.
Not the taste of the drink. It probably tastes different to everybody.
That's true.
That's true. Actually, that's a Harry Potter thing where it's like the love potion. It smells different to each person based on
that's right,
what they like. And the same thing happens to Bran. And then both of them basically go on drug trips.
Yeah,
which was great. But I wanted to start back a little bit and go to the outside of the building. And George is being, I think, clever again, giving us a description of what it looks like and where it is. So it's a long winding stone building, which he describes like a serpent in amongst the trees. So almost like a snake in a grass kind of thing. But it's a snake with a human head, because the front entrance they don't actually go into. They go into the side entrance, which is a big gaping mouth, which reminds you of the Black Gate, obviously.
Yep.
So a lot of weirwood connections, stuff from the north that's weirdly in Karth. Amanda, or Crowfoot's daughter, has talked about this a lot, and I think she's right on rereading this a few times, that like, yeah, this seems extremely similar to Bran's journey.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, even the description of the house as looking like a serpent, like the wall is also a snake that cuts across the boundary between the north and the true north, right? Like it's tall, but the House of the Undying is almost like a mini wall in that sense. Which, I mean, I feel like that raises weird. All sorts of interesting. Yeah, exactly. Speaking of the Night Fort from last year, the Black Gate, the mouth entrance, like it's these really similar things. The Black Gate isn't the main entrance either.
No,
for the wall. The side entrance. Yeah, right. It's the food delivery entrance, I guess. It's
the baby delivery entrance is what that is.
Oh.
And the other thing I thought that was really interesting, so it's a serpent with a human face on it, so that makes it basically a Valyrian Sphinx, right? Because that's what they are. They're dragons with human heads. So we're going to get to some of the questions I got from Twitter and YouTube and patrons, but it seems very likely that the Palace of Dust, as it's called, or the House of the Undying, probably built by dragon people, I would say. They built a weird giant palace that's shaped like a snake that is like almost a statue of a Valyrian Sphinx. So
yeah,
especially because they talk about how I'll teach you the secrets of the speech of dragon kind inside. So clearly one of the Undying thinks he's a dragon lord.
That's fair. I mean, if you were conspiracy minded like myself, you might say that this could be built by the Great Empire of the Dawn, or some sort of massive dragon related, overarching hegemony from Ashai to Old Town. But yeah, you're right. That's a good observation about the man-headed snake that is the building.
It's certainly out of place for the rest of Karth, and everyone else distrusts the House of the Undying. Yeah. I thought it was really interesting that the chapter is about 10 pages. I would say the first 2 are everyone saying, Danny, don't do this. You're crazy. Do not go into this building.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And no one trusts the warlocks at all. Everyone dislikes them. They have power in the city, but no one's like, oh yeah, my buddies, Pyat Pri et al. Like, yeah, no. It's a really wary kind of trust. Almost like it brings to mind for me like how Varamir Sixskins made himself into sort of a magic monster king in the True North for a while. How he was like this shaman king, and everyone paid him homage and all that, but like they weren't waving Sixskin banners and going, yeah, we love Varamir. Like same thing with the warlocks.
Yeah, it's very much what you would expect from people with extreme power, what they would do to the rest of the area around them. Usually it would lead to tyrants. And actually, I pulled the quote for the description of Pyat Pri. You want to give it a shot in your best voice?
Oh, yeah. Is that in the doc right here?
Yeah. Under Matt's random thoughts.
Oh, great. I see it. Oh yeah, this is the one that Zaro is telling Danny about Payat Pri, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Payat Pri has blue lips, and it is truly said that blue lips speak only lies. Heed the wisdom of one who loves you. Warlocks are bitter creatures who eat dust and drink of shadows. They will give you naught. They have naught to give. So.
Yeah, that is a big turn the F around. And also he does a creepy like step out from the tree and surprising everybody. Like he was just standing on the other side of a shade in the evening tree, just like sitting there going,
Yeah, right.
That's what happens. He goes like, Daenerys can only go in alone. They're like, where'd you come from?
Yeah, right. Yeah. What the was that?
Is that Payat Pri? Where did he come from with his blue lips?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Payat Pri, I think he's interesting, obviously, because he's the first of the three searchers to introduce himself to Danny.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, all three of them have played a role continuing from there, but his role has, I think, been of a different type than the others. Quaithe and Zaro have both popped up concretely and hologram style, but Pri basically disappears and then like pops up again in the Forsaken after we hear all these things about him, which seems fitting for a warlock.
Yeah, he's got a long reputation, which is interesting because like when he's introduced, he's kind of, I mean, he looks a little weird, but he doesn't present himself like apparently the powerful person in the world that he is. He just kind of looks like, honestly, like almost like a meth junkie.
Yeah. Yeah.
A little bit. And speaking of the shade of the evening trees, this is something Crowfood's daughter has talked about a lot. And we got a question here from my patron Zombie Jesus. He says, if there's still, it's always a great night.
Yeah, I know, it gets me.
If there's still time to get a question in for tonight, I'd like to know your thoughts on whether wyrds need blood to grow/live. If not, why do we get so many instances of sacrificing near them? And to tie us to House of the Undying, are there any references to the shade of the evening trees being treated similarly as an object to which you sacrifice lives to please them? And Amanda has, I think, really nailed it, that there is a very odd connection between shade of the evening trees and wyrds that if they're not the same thing, just like gone wrong, then they're very, very close.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting because we don't see explicitly in the text anything for what Zombie Jesus is talking about with, explicit reference to sacrifices at the shade of the evening trees, at the black barked trees. But it's definitely a template that George is showing us.
Yes.
With these magic trees that have like magic juice that makes you see the future and the past, so that when we see the wyrds, we're like, oh yeah, we've seen something like that before. So I feel like, that can work both ways, where it may well be that the black barked trees are themselves also fed by the heart of the House of the Undying or something, like that there's a connection to them in the structure of the house, in the Undying ones themselves, like whatever it is, that the black bark trees they're not just landscaping and they're like, oh, these trees grow here, we should build like a weird cult palace and drink the juice, like that there's a more symbiotic relationship.
And going to the shade of the evening and the wyrd paste, they both taste like meat. They both taste like blood, although the shade of the evening tastes foul. So most people think the wyrd paste is actually Jojen. So that leads you to think the shade of the evening is also people, which would make sense. There's a quote where a lot of people go into the House of the Undying, not many come out. Well, where they go, maybe they're being turned in the shade of the evening, just like for Jojen paste. That would make a lot of sense. Yeah. And since we know wyrds do take blood, and if shade of the evening trees are pretty much the same thing, then I would expect so. Especially because kind of like wyrds, they're growing and thriving, but not. They shouldn't be. It's Karth. Like nothing grows there. They have palm trees, and that's about it. It's a giant desert, and yet there's this amazing orchard of these weird ass trees inside the walls. Okay. Yeah. So something's sustaining them. It's probably not good horticulture, I would say.
Right. It's not that they have like a green thumb. They've got a good gardening club in Karth to keep those alive. I mean, the Undying ones themselves do try to basically like vampire Danny before Drogon saves her. So there's definitely an element of like literal blood sucking from these people who draw their power from the trees. So it feels like maybe there's an intermediary step in there that we don't necessarily see with weirwoods. Like people just give blood to weirwoods. But with the Shade of the Evening trees, we see people who like are connected to the trees drinking other people's blood. So maybe one step removed, but it's still there.
A lot of people go into probably the House of the Undying to become acolytes and instead become wine, I would say.
Oh, yeah. Soylent Blue is people.
Oh, yeah. In the chat, somebody just made Wheezy Squeezebox, Shade of the Evening, Soylent Green. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah.
Blue Thumb. Oh, yeah. This Sasuke. Yep. You guys are on the same place.
There we go.
Which also makes an interesting thing about Euron. We'll come back to him later, but the fact that
I expect so.
That he's just probably engaging in cannibalism. Anyway, so there's obviously a lot of connections to the Night Fort and also Blood Raven's Cave, which we talked about last year. And also there's quite a lot of, I would say, literary connections here that George is calling on with both of them. We talked about The Shining last year a lot in terms of the Night Fort is essentially like the Overlook Hotel. And I would say that the House of the Undying is very, very similar, especially the walking past the rooms and seeing ghosts in there, how that happens to Wendy as she's running through.
That's right. Yeah.
They are such good friends. I would not be surprised if George literally just took the scene of her running through the Overlook after Jack is going crazy and saying, okay, I'm going to make that into my book.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those like cultural milieu things that pops in there. And now George is going to use it because he's borrowing from everything. I definitely think, exactly. I definitely see that now. It's the Undying. For me, I think it evokes mostly like the sword and sorcery kind of Robert E. Howard, Conan story kind of thing. Because these wizards are very much Conan wizards. The Undying. I mean, they are like these corrupt, old, gross people who live in a tower, and their magic is mysterious, and the protagonist doesn't really need to like understand their magic to get that it's mysterious and bad. It's not like Dany walks in and she's like, oh, I see, the blue heart is actually like, connected to. No, she walks in and she's like, oh, what the fuck, and then her dragon burns it. Like it's so there is I'm gonna go very like deep lore nerd here, but I'm going to bring up my Red Sonja thing that I put in the document.
Red Sonja, here we go, guys.
In Savage Sword of Conan, issue 23 from 1977, there's a Red Sonja story called Wizards of the Black Sun. And Red Sonja is kind of a Conan equivalent character. She was created by Robert E. Howard. Probably best known for like the chainmail bikini aesthetic, which really has not aged well. Like this entire comic story that I'm talking about is very much Leia in Jabba's palace, but like swinging a sword around and doing stuff. But the basic plot of it is that she's like tricked into coming into this fairy city where a bunch of warlocks who are like all decrepit and skeletal try to seal her away. And there's like a big magic floating disc with a skull on it that's going to drain her soul. And then she escapes by picking the correct door to leave through. Thanks to like a riddle that a goat told her. That's literally the plot of the story. But I'm not saying George read Savage Sword of Conan number 23 from 1977, although maybe he did. But it's a story that has a lot of relations to other Robert E. Howard stories and other like sword and sorcery tropes. And it's that kind of thing that I think is popping back up here. It's George, showing his love for the classics of the genre. And the stuff that he grew up on, like he's talked about. Yeah. Right, George? I mean, you're sitting there in front of me wearing that hat. So,
I do love Robert E. Howard. That's my terrible George impression. I've actually read Robert E. Howard myself.
We'll do a Howard
I'm going to
cast.
believe you that that's all true, and it sounds pretty damn close, so I would be surprised if he didn't. He is a giant comic book nerd, too. There's also definitely Lovecraft references in here. There's a lot of like weird amorphous things following Dany around, kind of like horror tropes. There's a lot of rats in the walls sort of ideas going on. It's very much, I would say, especially the idea of the protagonist just sort of seeing beyond the veil, sort of, which is what's happening here. I mean, he has it happen via hallucinogens, basically, but people are reacting to my
yeah.
The best impression ever.
That's right.
He has it being hallucinogens, but Lovecraft would have this being somebody like reading from the Necronomicon or like chanting something for a while, and then all these things start happening.
Yeah,
but it's
or talking to a person of color or whatever. Big Lovecraft dig there.
Yeah, that wasn't. I am almost finished with the Lovecraft book after like 6 months because it's so ponderous.
All right,
I'm almost there. And yeah, I was seeing all the same tropes he uses over and over and over again. The ancient old building full of ghosts and weirdness and like weird zombie things sometimes, people hearing things that aren't there, things that don't make sense. It's like, yeah, this is straight out of Lovecraft, the entire thing. And also, interestingly, it's parts of it are straight out of his own stories. In particular, the Shade of the Evening is very, very similar in effect to something that happens in Night Flyers. The psychic on board, Thale, he drinks something, or they give him a drug called Esperon. And what it is in the story is it essentially takes whatever lingering psychic abilities you have and puts them through the roof. You become like, I don't even know, like Professor X gone insane. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Doing one of those.
Yeah.
Thale's head eventually ends up exploding after taking Esperon because I don't even understand how that happened. But that seems to be what happens here. Dany does get dragon dreams. Dany does have some kind of weird warging-ish connection with her dragons. And then she takes Shade of the Evening, and all of a sudden things go batshit insane for her. The things she's seeing cannot be possible even within his world. Like the geometry of what he's talking about is frankly doesn't match anything we're being told. So
no,
either she's imagining it through like a weird psychic world, which seems to be what's happening, or he decided to make like true Cthulhu style geometry work in this. And I would say it's probably the drank.
Yeah, it's that purple drank she had. Speaking of dranks, though, JD Redhead in chat did bring up something that I think is a good thing to mention, which was a comparison to the wine of courage that the Unsullied drink, which isn't in the show. So I think it's an important thing to talk about because it didn't make it in the show. It doesn't contain Shade of the Evening in it. It has Nightshade, which is in itself deadly. But I mean, just to kind of speak to that real quick, I think it's so it acts as like a numbing agent, basically, right? Like it's this like senses dulling thing that allows the Unsullied to have their superpower ability to withstand pain. And I think, I mean, in the role of the story, I think it plays the same kind of role as the Weirwood Paste or the Shade of the Evening, in that it's something, it's this magic potion that a person can drink that gives them access to power by shutting off certain parts of their brain. And like what I'm saying is that it involves shutting off access to like certain vulnerable parts of your brain and opening up new possibilities by, like that trope of we only use 5% of our brains, but what if we used 100%? It's like that, I think, with a lot of these beverages in Martin's world.
Loves potions.
Yeah. It's funny, for a low fantasy series, we've got magic potions, we've got wizards. There's quite a lot of. Are you summoning something, by the way? I noticed you had your summoning.
As you said
lights.
that, like the wind rose and like shuddered against the house, and the window creaked. So. Maybe you're getting a little bit too close to the truth, Michael.
So you're telling me this live stream is going to become a live scream? Yeah, great.
Oh, yeah, this live stream's going to get pretty crazy. George R. Martin here.
Oh, jaded redhead without the A's. I'm so dumb. I get it now.
I didn't get that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anyway, I mean, that's kind of a tangent talking about the magic potions, but
yeah, it is very much a tangent. It is something George loves, so it's interesting how it connects. And just like kind of like my last video where I was like explaining the magic sort of thing. It's like, what is Shade of the Evening? I would say it's basically just Esperon from Night Flyers. It's the same as the Weirwood Paste. All it does is essentially unlock your third eye by drinking it.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's all it has to do. We haven't even gotten into the House of the Undying though. We're still in the antechamber.
Yeah, let's kick it in the door. And who's this fellow? Just inside the door here. This short fellow.
This weird little guy.
Yeah.
He's pink for some reason. And he's wearing very nice robes, but he's very tiny, and he's essentially carrying a Shade of the Evening on like a weird plate above his head.
Yeah,
that was odd.
Yeah, I'm a big Twin Peaks guy. I gotta think that on some level, this is George reacting to like the little dancing man from Twin Peaks.
I definitely got that vibe.
Just like, especially because to take that seriously, like there's this idea of like the dweller on the threshold, right? Like the kind of creature inhabiting a liminal space that like meets you as you're crossing from one world to the next. And yeah, I mean, I haven't done the research to be able to back this up, but I feel like the image of like the dwarf or fairy or whatever it is that's dwelling on that threshold that like welcomes you in or gives you something or changes you in some way as you cross. I think that's a pretty common, not common in the sense of boring, but common in the sense of like strong thematic tie to a lot of other works.
And to back that up, I just did a quick Google search, and A Clash of Kings came out 9 years before Twin Peaks.
Yeah,
and I would say David Lynch is definitely right in Martin's wheelhouse in terms of weird shit he likes putting on screen. Nicole G says Twin Peaks, Lynch is the motherfucking boss. Yes, he is.
Yeah. How is that popping up on the screen, by the way? That's cool.
I can click things, apparently.
Oh, man. You are a magician. You are a magician.
I would say definitely not only just The Shining, but definitely Twin Peaks as Danny's walking down the halls and seeing weird visions and kind of not really going anywhere, but feels like she's been walking for hours.
Yes.
Like, it happens to Cooper as he walks through and actually does see ghosts as he's walking through it.
Yep. Like he sees all sorts of crazy shit. In fact, I'm pretty sure he actually has a vision of like a beautiful woman being ravaged on the floor, which is exactly one of Danny's visions. So like, I mean, no one's calling George R. R. Martin a ripoff, but there's definitely these things that like just float his boat, and he's like interested in them, and he's like, yeah, that's going to be in my story too, in its own way. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely consider, like, if I was to pick the perfect person to make a George R. R. Martin story into a TV show, I would probably choose David Lynch, especially for the fantasy part.
That would be cool as hell, actually.
Him doing Bran, like Bran's visions, and him going to the cave, and even doing that as the Undying, I would think that would be amazing.
Yeah, it actually would, or even like a Cersei chapter, I feel like would be great with David Lynch kind of helming that. There was one of the. This wasn't really a question, although I guess it was one of the ones from Twitter, from Callie Kesh. Do you picture the dwarf that hands Danny the shade cup as Dobby from Harry Potter?
That's kind of what I went to. I didn't really have another mental picture to choose from. I'm not really sure what George is referencing there. It's probably from some story I've never read, I would guess. Because it's a weirdly specific image of a warlock being... They almost seem like homunculuses or something, like magical things made from nothing.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good connection there. Yeah, a magical servitor, a homunculus or something. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Dobby for sure. Yeah,
Dobby.
I bet if Danny had just given that dwarf a sock, the whole series would have been different.
She was turned around and been like, I don't need the wisdom of the Undying.
That's right.
That's fair. So this is one thing that now that we're inside the building, she drains the Shade of Evening, and she gets told this weird set of instructions. She gets told to take only the last door on the right that she comes across, and only go up. Yeah. If she comes to any sort of stairwell, which is strange because the House of the Undying from the outside is kind of squiggly and one story. So Danny listens to that and sort of goes like, wait, how many doors can there be? And then instantly after she drains the the shade of the evening, I would say she starts tripping immediately. Because either, like I was saying, either the House of the Undying's geometry is impossible, or this is all in her head. Because I wrote down the direction she took.
Oh, good.
When she went through there. Oh wait, where did I write these down?
He didn't write it down, folks.
No, it's in my notebook.
It's a tragic.
She goes through three. She goes to 3 rooms with 4 doors each. So that's a lot of doors. That's a lot of passages. And even assuming that all those other doors are fake, that there's only one passage you can take. Let's say that's true. If you go into a room you go to the right, okay? You end up in the next room, go to the right, and the next room, go to the right. She should be back in the entrance hall. Instead, she's in a completely different room, a weird stone room that she's never seen before. And if all those are real, then it gets to basically, what's it called? I forget the name of it. It's a thing where things branch out into trees.
Like
fractals. Yeah. It becomes,
yeah.
If you take that map and you extend it out, it's essentially a giant fractal tree of possibilities that she can go down. Especially as she gets to the second set of rooms she goes to, where she goes to, I think, 6 rooms with 4 doors each. Each of those possibilities, if you just keep multiplying them out, it makes the House of the Undying impossibly big. It could not be that big. It would take up the entire space of Essos to have all those kind of passages.
Yeah, right.
So what I actually thought of was, I wonder if George had ever heard of the Winchester Mystery House. You ever heard of this?
Okay. Yeah, I actually have. I've listened to a murder mystery podcast about it. Not that it's a murder mystery house, but yeah, it's a cool one, right?
It's a weird one. So it was built by the heir to the Winchester fortune, the Winchester rifle fortune. And she became convinced by a psychic that everyone killed by her family's rifles would haunt her for the rest of her life. And in response to that, she built a house upon this guy's instructions, which I don't know what the instructions are for building a house that ghosts can't go into, but apparently he had the blueprint for it. And it's this crazy house with doors and stairways that go to nowhere, false doors everywhere, mirrors and windows in places they shouldn't be, essentially to try and trick spirits into becoming trapped in a maze. Basically, that's the idea behind it. And you can go through the Winchester Mystery House and you will get lost in about half a second.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what this is. That's what the House of the Undying is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It almost brings to mind the idea of the maze makers of Lorath or something, like these constructions that, if you were building it to be used by humans, you wouldn't build it this way, and you wouldn't design, there's some otherworldly purpose at work. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great comparison. Especially the trapping thing. I mean, it does feel like, we've talked about how the Undying have these vampiric qualities and, bring people in and they're never seen again. It's a classic fantasy riddle type thing. Then they get trapped forever in the House of the Undying, and they open one door and it just leads them to a gigantic mashing blade or something that turns them into Swiss cheese. It's definitely
easy to kidnap them.
Yes.
And they just get lost in the House of the Undying. Even if it's not as bizarre as Danny Tripping Balls thinks it is, it's probably still pretty complicated. Because on our way out, all the doors disappear.
Right.
So something strange happened there. So I think definitely if it's most likely trapped, maybe for the ghosts, because there seem to be actual ghosts inside. But also the Piet Pre talks about servitors and dwellers. So what are dwellers?
Yeah.
What are the dwellers of the House of the Undying? Because she doesn't come across anybody but ghosts and the servants.
That's right. But it's very creepy to hear that. There might be a Gru lurking in the darkness. Yeah. It's such an odd thing. This idea of the creatures who live in the House of the Undying.
One of them's a worm, apparently. Which actually made me think of Dune a little bit. That happens to one of the emperors. They essentially turn into a worm, right?
Yeah, that's what Leto Atreides II or something is.
I did a quick Google. It jogged something in my memory.
He becomes a gigantic worm is basically the plot of the story. Yeah, no, but I mean, there is, I think there is, a good comparison to be made there by people who have read Dune more thoroughly.
Yes,
than
more
you and
than
I.
myself.
Yeah.
I don't really know that one. So let's just start talking about Dany's journey through it.
Let's do it.
So the first one she comes across is probably the most troubling one, and this is probably intentional by George, just really to throw us off and be like, this is going to get really messed up really fast. And it's the image of, unfortunately, a beautiful naked woman laying on a floor in basically an empty room with 4 of those weird servant guys basically raping her.
Yeah, that's. I think ravishing is the word
Ravishing
used,
is the term,
but like, we know what that means. Yeah. It's I think it's the perfect first vision because, like you said, and that was a good observation that like it kind of lets you know what you're in for in the House of the Undying. You're like, so this is what we're doing. But also it is a decipherable metaphor. Like you can look at that and be like, oh, there's 4 kings ravaging Westeros. I get it. Like it's a wonderful first vision because it sets the tone super well for everything that is to come, both in terms of like how you can interpret these visions and the tone. That's an amazing comment, by the way. The H.H. Holmes murder house.
The super chat here from Vampris99 reminds him of the H.H. Holmes murder house. If nobody's ever heard of this, it was a house built in Chicago, right? This is the one we're talking about, the same one?
Yeah, during the World's Fair was when he was most active.
It's basically what a lot of horror movies are built on. He built a hotel, essentially, and the rooms had all trapdoors, and they went down to torture chambers and like butcher rooms and all the worst things you can think of.
Yeah.
And that's probably what he was thinking of when he designed the House of the Undying.
Yeah. I mean, and some of them had like gas lines that led into them so he could gas people and like just awful stuff. There's a book, Devil in the White City, that's about H.H. Holmes. He was just an absolute mass murderer. He was allowed his last request when he was finally like executed, which was to be buried in a block of cement, like how he buried all of his victims. That's just a fun fact about Triple H. Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, but back to the House of the Undying.
Anyway.
Yeah, that image, as you were saying, has been deciphered as Westeros itself being destroyed by the 4 kings. I actually had a different interpretation that came about from my last video. I didn't include it because I found the images. I didn't want to put them on a YouTube video, basically. But you can sort of think of that as the destruction of the natural world by the humans, sort of thing. Because that's what I concluded at the end of my when will the weather go back to normal? Well, it won't, because the natural world and the magical world is being destroyed in sort of like climate change sort of thing. And I think that's another easy comparison you can make. It doesn't just have to be the 4 kings. It can just be humanity destroying the natural world, and the natural world essentially just like falling apart, kind of like what seems to can happen to this woman, because I think they bite off her nipple, and that's not good.
Yep. Yeah, worrying at it until it turns red. And like, I mean, yeah, like the idea of like a Gaia or a Mother Nature kind of figure, I think that's a good connection to make there. You can also even interpret in a kind of more broad sense about like the way the very like harsh patriarchy of Westeros just causes everyone to like, the people who act empowered by the patriarchy are really like these small little monsters. That's how they're described in the book.
Yes.
And then that, the people who suffer because of it are just forced to like accept it. Yeah, like I think that's a good take. You can really expand it a lot to look at those extractive and ravishing systems.
Sure. And also a good comment here from Leaf Underhill talking about the maze aspect of the Undying, saying that apparently in China they are arched or zigzagged for the same reason.
Oh,
something about spirits can only travel in straight lines.
Yeah. Okay.
It's weird and okay. So
it is sinuous, right? It's like snaky.
That seems to be a weird thing. So she moves on past that pretty quickly.
Yes.
I'm glad for it. It was a creepy image, but very much setting the tone. The next one is one that people have obsessed with for quite a long time. It's the Red Wedding, a book early, basically, right? Or is it what? Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a book early.
Yeah.
So George was planning it all this time. It's the Frey Hall with everyone just kind of frozen where they were when they were killed. Like heads are taken off, arms are missing, but some of them are still holding goblets. Some of them are still like partying, but like they're missing body parts. It's really grim. And then sitting up on the throne, which actually doesn't happen in the real Red Wedding, but it's Robb Stark with Grey Wind's head sewn on, but alive.
Yeah.
But full of wounds.
Yep.
Which was like a terrifying image.
Oh, it's probably like one of the most just horrifying images in the series, because we end up knowing like, oh, that's Robb. Like we like Robb. Yeah. It's not just like a scary image of someone. Yeah, you have a real connection to this like wolf-headed man who is full of wounds, and you're like, oh, he's like 15. Like, what the fuck? Yeah, it is definitely the Red Wedding early. It's interesting that Robb, like you said, he's presiding over it here, but isn't in.
He dies with the rest of his men.
Right. So it almost feels like this is her looking at like a Valhalla type thing, or like a Hall of the Dead, where like Robb is presiding over the ghosts of all the people who died with him or something. Like it's a very strange. It also could be that George R. R. Martin didn't know how he was going to stage the Red Wedding exactly.
He decided later. He decided later it was better having him die next to Kat rather than up on a dais.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's probably more likely, but I like the idea that it's Robb presiding over all of his loyal ghosts.
And one thing I found really interesting, because when I was rereading this actually today, I kept track of which spirits and ghosts could see Dany, and Robb is one of the few that did. It says that as she looks in, the wolf's eyes look at her with mute appeal. So it's essentially going like, and like following her with its eyes, which is very strange, because when we get to some of the later ones, people you would expect to see Dany, or maybe I don't understand, but like Robb does. Robb sees Dany, and Robb's a warg. So is this some kind of like magical thing where, he maybe, as he was dying, maybe he actually did see Dany at the end of the hall?
Yeah, how weird. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that idea before, or you've talked about that idea, I should say, before, with the Pyres and Blood. The idea that people have seen Dany kind of throughout the years. This idea that Robb sees her and is like, not just sees her, but is like, hey, can you do something about this? Like, fix
I'm
this.
being killed. Help. You with the dragon. That, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, maybe somebody should ask George that. Could the people in the visions that are real see her? Because some of them can't and some of them can. Also, Steven Stark pointing out, 100 people are watching right now. Slam that MF and like button.
Come on and slam the like button.
Like, share, all the things. Thank you guys for coming out on Halloween. I know a lot of your parents have kids are taken out. It's a rainy, crappy night in the Northeast. So, very touched you chose to spend your time with us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think we can move on past that one. It's a horrifying scene. I think it's the one that hurts the most out of everything we see. Like, personally, when I saw that, there were other things that were like more distasteful, but that one like was a gut punch. I was like, the Red Wedding again.
Yeah, right. Yep. It really hurts coming again. I mean, the next one for Dany too is like, that's one for Dany that's significant, where she sees the red door again, the house with the red door, which even here doesn't get much of a like lengthy description. The house with the red door is to this day, I think, pretty ambiguous in its descriptions. Like we're told about some of the beams with the animals carved on them, I think, but other than that, he leaves it pretty open as to how we want to picture the house with the red door. So for her, it's just, she sees the house with the red door and she recognizes it. She's like, oh, hell yes. My childhood home.
But the really interesting thing I thought about that was she saw the house with the red door, and then the text says that she expected to see Willem Darry, and then he appeared. So it
Yeah.
appears much like we were talking about earlier with like the psychic Esperon stuff. This one seems to be responding to her, where this is like a room that's trying to trap her, a room that's trying to. The other ones weren't trying to trap her.
Yep.
The other ones were just like horrible things, maybe to move her on. But this room wants her to come inside, and it uses the image of Willem Dafoe. It reaches out with its hand, and she has to remind herself he's dead, and then run along, terrified of what she just saw. And I think that's a really a shining part of this part of the story, where clearly some parts of the House of the Undying are alive, and they want her to stay. And it's unclear whether it's the building, if it's the Undying, or whatever's inside those doors.
Yeah, or even the trees. You know, I mean,
the trees.
That you're right. That is an enormously spooky moment where she realizes, like like she sees Willem and she's like, oh, yep, okay, oh, hold up,
wait, dead.
Yeah, hold on. It's very unsettling. It's scary in a way that like it's not as gruesomely scary as like the preceding visions with the blood and guts, but it's definitely unsettling because
it's personal.
Yeah, it's showing Dany's fragility too. I mean, like she is not that I don't think the text really suggests that she was about to like linger there forever with Willem Dafoe, but you know, just this idea. That's right. Like she's tempted for a moment. She's like, he's here.
Maybe I could go home again. It's almost kind of like again, I think a Stephen King story, where the Pennywise, it does not actually look like that. He looks like whatever he thinks will kind of trap people the best.
Yeah.
So that seems to be what's happening here. It's a room or a spirit that is very malevolent, knows who Dany is reaching into her mind, and also pulling out the image of Willem and showing it back to her. And that's very scary.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, you're right. Yeah. She looks in the abyss and it looks back.
And I think this is one of the visions that I think a lot of people just sort of breeze by. It's like, oh, he wasn't really there, but really think about how scary it is that it pulled that from her brain,
right,
or her past. Whichever one it was is not good.
And we'll see that later too when we talk about some of the other things about how it, and by it I mean the force of the Undying, whatever it is, like is pulling things that she wanted to see, that she has seen, like is like pulling all this gestalt together.
Patrick Doherty saying Rorschach's test stuff. Yeah, definitely like that. Along those lines. Let's take a question real fast, and we'll go back to going through the narrative of what happened. Let's see here. Let's grab. Okay, this one from Steven Stark from Patreon, also mod and in the chat. Thank you, Steven. What do you think the narrative purpose is of Dany's experience in the House of the Undying? He goes on to describe the different kinds of images, how they're strange and disturbing. What do they mean? Do we think? Why did George write this? What's the point of this chapter existing? Because it doesn't have to.
Yeah, it's true. I mean. And you could almost say that about Karth as a whole, frankly, even more so than the Hotu. But I mean, I think the House of the Undying it's an important bookend, at least, to her first chapter in Clash, where she is this, and shout out to Notacast, who just covered this with Mighty Isabel in a really spectacular way, this chapter, Dany's first Clash chapter, but where she's really this like prophet in the wilderness. And it feels like in answer to that, she has to go on some sort of spiritual journey, right? Like she has to go into Hades like Odysseus. She has to experience sort of these underworld, these otherworldly visions and things. So in that sense, I think it makes a lot of sense as a continuation of how the book starts for her. In terms of the story going forwards for her, I mean, I think that's a great question, because prophecy is clearly ramping up in her story as something she cares about. You know, Quaithe brings her the warnings about the Mummer's the son of the sun, right? Griffin and Pale Flame, the Pale Horse, or something. I'm losing the thread, but Griffin and Black Flame, Pale Horse, but Pale Mare. But prophecy is clearly important for Dany, and I think will continue to mount in importance as she gets closer to the others and to being told that she is Azor Ahai, maybe incorrectly. And so I think this is an important step in that process of like just opening the world, opening her doors of perception.
Literally opening doors.
Yeah, exactly. To just welcome some of that magic and prophecy into her life in a new way.
I would agree. And just in general, I would say Dany is maybe has the most magical story in A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, she bursts the dragons, Drogo comes back from the dead, she goes into the House of the Undying, she has Quaithe messing with her mind. Bran is, I would say, like 1B if she's 1A. Like this is by far the most magical POV I think we get. I mean, Melisandre only gets like a couple chapters, but the whole way through, start to finish, Dany is the fantasy hero.
Yeah,
in a way
absolutely.
that a lot of the other characters could be just historical fiction if they wanted to. And it also sets the stage. I've talked about this in a lot of my other videos, but in particular, the idea that the Targaryens are tuned into something that other people aren't. And that's sort of the secret to their success. They call them bookish. They call them mad. They call them witches sometimes. But the important underlying fact is that they see something the rest of the world doesn't. And I think this is kind of similar to that this is Dany's introduction to that world. There's even the vision before the dragons hatch where she sees what I think are the great empires of the great emperors of the dawn urging her onwards with their different colored eyes, and it's like, what was that doesn't happen to other people. Like, the closest you get is like Jon thinking that the statues in Winterfell are looking at him, not people turning and shouting at him with blades of fire. She's a very magical character, and she actually calls that out in this chapter where I think it's Jorah says, remember Miri Mazdor, and Dany says, that's why I have to go in. The door has been opened for her into this wider world of magic, and George has decided that this motif of the spooky building with the weird attendants and the like zombie king psychic character that he uses later for Bran is how he wants to do it. This is basically a dry run for Bran.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't want to harp on the show too much because I think the discussion of the book House, The Undying, has to be kind of separate, but I know it's controversial to take the show's ending as canon in any form, but I do tend to think that the show's ending was mostly canon, and that that Dany will be faced at some point with the fact that she might not be Azor Ahai. She might not be the fantasy hero that she's had all of these experiences telling her she's the fantasy hero. Like that. Going through the House of the Undying will be important later because she will be able to look back at it and go, but wait, why am I not the fantasy hero? Like, I did that. And that's what fantasy heroes do.
It happens to a lot of other Targaryens. They have the same thing happen to him. Aemon goes through the same stuff. He's like, I did everything right. Why didn't it work?
Right. And so I think that's I'm hoping that's kind of where the story goes, because I think it'd be really interesting for George to explore that idea of her feeling like, looking back at her experiences and being like, well, yeah, but I like, look at my story. Of course I'm a fantasy hero, even if she's not. And comparing it to Bran, who I think in the books will have, like you said, similar thing with Bloodraven in the cave. He's experiencing these same kind of fantasy hero things. That doesn't mean either one of them is a perfect fantasy hero. It just means that they'll both be able to look back and like draw on that in some way. So anyway, King Bran. I said it, Patrick.
Good question from Stephen Sterk there.
Thank you, Stephen.
Crofu's daughter just came back, and she missed us talking all about the shady evening trees and how they're weirwoods.
That's right. Well, I think we shouted her out plenty, but
sorry, Amanda.
I hope we can't shout her out enough, frankly.
No, does amazing stuff. So let's go back to the visions, because we were just talking about Targaryens and how they relate to prophecy and magic, and then Aerys.
Yeah.
We see she opens the great bronze doors of the Red Keep into the throne room and sees Aerys sitting on the throne, apparently in front of Jaime, telling Rossert, is that his name? The pyromancer?
Yeah.
To burn them all, that he will let him be king of ashes and an overcooked meat. And yeah, that's a thing to show Dany as a character.
Yeah. Yeah. It's obviously super tied in again with the end of the show, but it's also like, it's a PSA. It's a Targaryen PSA. It's like, hey, don't just burn people. Yeah. What's interesting to me too about this vision is that she pushes open the bronze doors of the Red Keep, right? She has never been to the Red Keep, and yet we know from the rest of the story, like if you do a search of Ice and Fire, the doors to the Red Keep are bronze. Like she's experiencing the real Red Keep, not just her imagined version of it. So she is seeing like security camera real style this memory. It's not being pulled from her subconscious or something. It's her visiting a real thing that happened.
Somebody's connecting her to this. Which like we were talking about with Bran, happens to him right after he takes the weirwood paste, and he goes on that massive trip through time where he sees through the weirwood eyes the total life of Winterfell, where he goes from, he sees Ned, then he sees Benjen and Lyanna, then he sees probably Dunk and Old Nan, then he sees the woman with the baby, then he sees the blood sacrifice, and that seems to be happening here too. She's tumbling back in time, at least in this instant. Somebody has connected her, which is, again, speaking to just how crazy the House of the Undying is, and how close they probably are to the Weirwoods, that this seems to be a similar power that both of these groups have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And across the world. They're in Essos. Bran sees literally
space and time.
He sees through the Winterfell Weirwood. Dany's seeing another continent.
This is also why there were people who were a little peeved with the show for letting Bran kind of wander beyond the Weirwoods in his visions. But I mean, Bloodraven does tell him explicitly, like, eventually you'll see beyond the Weirwoods. But we've seen it in the story already, that this is something magic can do when you're having these magic visions. That it's not limited to, like, oh, yes, you can only see out of, like, that camera, and it oscillates, so you can only see the parking lot when it's, like, there's a lot of power in this kind of magic. A lot of power.
And that drank.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. This podcast sponsored by Blue Gatorade. No, I'm just
by the shed, which I have not drank any more of.
Oh yeah, shockingly, yeah.
I was also tracking, like I said, with Rob, who could hear Dany and who couldn't. Aerys could not hear them, right? And it's noted that right after Aerys gives the order, Drogon essentially yells in terror and claws into her shoulders, hearing Aerys give that order.
Right.
He's been scared of the other visions. They note that he's kind of wary of the rats. When somebody's pounding on one of the doors, he kind of like hisses at it. But this vision of Aerys scares the shit out of Drogon.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, maybe Drogon in some way, people were giving the show crap for how Drogon burns the Iron Throne after Dany dies. But, I think there's definitely something there with Drogon being able to recognize, like, the dark implications of Dany's actions.
Yeah.
And of other Targaryens. Yeah, very intelligent. Yeah.
There's also a really funny thing that happens where it doesn't seem that just Dany's tripping balls. I think Drogon is too, because as they're walking down the hallway, it's noted that Drogon tries to take off from her shoulder, flies 20 feet, and crashes, just like falls into the dirt. And it's like, is Drogon drunk on a shady evening too? Because Dany drank it.
That's right. Yeah, he's symbiotically wasted. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that I found that really interesting. Drogon actually, I did this before with the die rolls, but tracking Drogon throughout this is because George loves the idea of psychic familiars. He writes it in Tough Voyaging
Mm,
too. Some of
yeah.
his other stories, there's psychic animals.
Hmm.
Drogon is reacting the same way they do. What he's scared of is telling you more than just what Dany perceives, because she's more confused at what she's seeing with Ares. Drogon's
Hmm.
scared, so.
Yep. Yep. No, I think you're right, and that hones in with the wolves as well. How the dire wolves are able to pick up on shit that the humans can't. It's like Grey Wind at the Red Wedding, balking at the phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah, very reminiscent of that actually. Yeah, yeah.
And then we get to the Big Daddy vision, the one that I
Mm.
think I quoted in 4 videos maybe at this point. The infamous vision of, well, it's Rhaegar, but Dany doesn't think so. She's like, Viserys, what are you doing there?
Yeah, yeah. Which is definitely obviously George's like little, you know, he doesn't like to be super overt, I think. And so it's, if a character's like, oh, is that so and so? Then that's your clue that it's not that person, but like you should be able to figure it out
It's
from
close.
that.
It's
Yeah.
Rhaegar and Elia with
Yep.
baby Aegon. I don't, is Rhaenys in there? I don't
I
think
don't
so.
remember. Yeah.
She might
She's
be.
not extensively mentioned.
Yeah, she may be in the room, but yeah, she sees her older brother Rhaegar with his first wife Elia and their newborn son Aegon, not Jon Snow. This is the Aegon that got killed by Amory Lorch. I always say
Yep.
Armory. And he drops the infamous line. This is where, this is like the title coming down,
Mm-hmm.
like in the middle of a movie, or like a song where somebody says the name of the song in the chorus. Rhaegar
Yeah.
says he has the Song of Ice and Fire.
Yep.
This is it. This is the big one.
Yeah. It's we get Ice and Fire really only as like a couple times in the series, and more of them are from Jojen and Mira than from like Targaryens. So yeah, this is definitely a big one. It's also one of our few real insights into Rhaegar Targaryen.
Yes.
Because
the only time we see him.
Again, yeah, like the Ares vision just before this, I think what we're seeing is like a real memory, right? It's not her subconscious generating this. It's a real thing.
And Rhaegar sees her.
Rhaegar sees her.
He sees her standing in the doorway and turns to talk to her because he's talking to Elia, and then he turns and looks out the doorway, and Dany's like, he's not that far away, and he's looking at me.
That's right. Yeah.
Weird. I pulled up the quote just because it's such a good one, and I've read it so many times.
Yeah.
Actually, you've read this for me too. Will you make first a song for him? The woman asked. He has a song, the man replied. He is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire. He looked up when he said it, and his eyes met Dany's, and it seemed as if he saw her standing there beyond the door. There must be one more, he said. Though whether he was speaking to her or the woman in the bed, she could not say. Again, hints to maybe why he picked Lyanna eventually. He needed another. There's rumors that Ellie couldn't have another kid anyway.
Yep.
The dragon has 3 heads. He went to the window seat, picked up a harp and ran his fingers lightly over the silvery strings. Sweet sadness filled the room as the man and wife and babe faded like morning mist, only the music lingering behind to speed her on her way.
Yeah.
George worked on that one for a while.
Yeah, that's right. You can really feel him like feeling himself on that. Yeah. He's definitely vibing. Yeah, man, what a quote. That whole Rhaegar looking towards her thing is so interesting because it almost makes me feel like sort of a chicken and egg type question here where like maybe he was just looking into the middle distance and he didn't think he was looking at anything, but his eyes meet Dany's, and so Dany, like regardless of what he thinks he's looking at, he is looking at Dany.
Yeah.
And Dany's looking back at him, which I mean, that's what's important. It's like, that's what's kind of keenly important about that scene.
And maybe the most important quote said to Dany in the entire House of the Undying is introducing the prince that was promised, which she hasn't heard of before, and this idea of a song of ice and fire, which no matter how it goes in the books, probably pretty similar to the show in like the broad strokes. She may remember this quote when she meets Jon, because the fact of ice and fire.
Yes, absolutely. Because like I mean, so many fans had guessed long before the show got there that Dany and Jon would end up together, partially because of the title Song of Ice and Fire. They're like, well, yeah, Dany's fire and Jon's ice. But Dany knows the title of the series too. Like, she also knows that this is a Song of Ice and Fire. So she meets Jon, and she's like, oh, ice and fire.
She knows she has history books. Maybe somebody will tell her about that as a reason that she should marry Jon. Like, fulfill the pact of ice and fire that everyone knows about that came from the Dance of the Dragons. Fulfill the thing that was there. It's almost like George essentially took Dany outside the book and turned it around and showed it to her.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think coming back to Stephen Stark's question earlier, that's a big part of the House of the Undying, right? Is like showing Dany kind of the bones of the story that she's in. Speaking of Stephen, he sent a super chat saying he is popping off to bed. So fare thee well.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for coming and slamming and jamming.
Come on and slam. Come on.
Yeah. I do also, I want to, I don't know how to do the magic comment thing, but Wheezy Squeeze Box is,
I'll grab this
I thought that was a good insight, that it is very inconsiderate of Rhaegar to be like,
kind of a dick.
So Elia, when can we like pop out another one? When can we get back to business? Yeah. Right.
And Rhaenys even, I think they said she was laid up in bed for like a year afterwards. Aegon almost killed her, and he's like, so got to get on my third one ASAP.
You know, there's this aspect to, and this is probably because I've like reread the Watchmen comic and I'm watching the new series, but there's an aspect to Rhaegar that is kind of like Ozymandias from the Watchmen comic.
Yeah.
About this whole, you know, he has this master plan, and like, yeah, he feels emotions, he feels strongly about things, but ultimately, like, it's about the plan, and it's about like putting things into motion despite the cost to the people he loves or the people he claims to love or whatever.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, it's which of course raises some interesting questions about him and Lyanna, but
it really does. And with the vision itself, I would say this is maybe the climax of the chapter, but I would not have called it that on the first read. I would say meeting the Undying is the climax, but on retrospect, going back, this is the big one.
Yep.
This is maybe what the chapter exists for.
It's definitely the like axis that the chapter rotates around, if not the climax. You know, it's the like center of the wheel. Yeah. Everything else, every other vision, frankly, will kind of refer to this one in some way, whether obliquely or directly. Yeah. Of course, it's after this that she meets Splendor of Wizards, but go ahead.
That's true. I'm just going to take a second and do a quick old plug-a-rooney.
Please do.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I had a video that came out earlier this week. It's titled Will There Be Another Long Night? Basically talking about the weird seasons that are going on. I'm gonna drop a link in chat here. So if you haven't seen that, that's a good thing to check out tomorrow, about 20 minutes long, and also a chance to shout out my Patreon. Patreon.com/JoeMagician. You can get access to quite a few things. One of them right now, patrons are using. They have the outline we're reading, so they know where we're going ahead of time. They also get access to the audio and video of anything I make early. There's a private Slack as well. If you don't know what Slack is, it's kind of like it's a chat room sort of thing. Invite only, very exclusive.
Ooh,
so you can get access to that, as well as Sam Rixian's art. So if you enjoy what you're watching and would like to see more of that kind of stuff, consider going to Patreon and signing up. It helps with costumes, and
there we go.
I don't find that many costumes. It's mostly like paying for like Adobe and like podcast hosting and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, it would be helpful. There's also the super chat thing where at any time, if you want to bump in and ask us a question that we haven't gotten to from the chat, you can do a super chat, ask it, and me and Michael will answer it.
Yeah, we will.
We will answer it. Did you have anything you want to plug?
Anything I want to plug? Shit, maybe not yet. I've got some stuff that's probably going to be coming around in the new year. For now, if you want to watch this space, you can always follow me on Twitter at Bookshelfstud, or follow my WordPress blog, offmichaelsbookshelf.wordpress.com, which is kind of the repository for everything that I do, whether it's on Reddit or somewhere else. it'll end up there. And of course, we did just drop a new Maester Monthly this past week, featuring the lovely and talented Kim Renfro, author of the unofficial guide to Game of Thrones, which is sitting right here next to me.
Somewhere down there, I'm not going to get it.
It's been sitting next to me for a while here, and yeah, it's a fantastic book. It's really a great look behind the scenes of Game of Thrones. So anyway, that Maester Monthly, we talked to Kim, and we also just talk about a bunch of random, just terrible Reddit posts and Pat Hayden for some reason, and there's a lot
of stuff.
Whole mishmash of things. Speaking of questions in the chat, by the way, there was a good one that we can quickly and easily answer as well, from Sasak in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm squinting at the chat box. Thank you. Did Gurm already have the name for this series? He did in his original pitch letter in October 1993. The first paragraph: here are the first 13 chapters of the high fantasy novel I promised you, which I'm calling A Game of Thrones. When completed, this will be the first volume in what I see as an epic trilogy with the overall title A Song of Ice and Fire. So from the very get-go, A Song of Ice and Fire has been his heart for the series. Absolutely. So when Rhaegar says this, it really is George referencing the title. It's not like he retroactively tried to fit that in. Yeah. Which makes it so cool.
The first time it's been mentioned in the books, I believe. There's, like you said, there's been weird, pseudo references. This is straight on.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, I think the closest we got up until that point was Jojen Mira swearing by fire and ice or something.
Yeah, and Ice and Fire mate or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's
or does that come later? That might come later.
Yeah. Anyway, that's brand 2, A Storm of Swords. Jojen says if ice and fire can mate, then or something. Anyway.
Going back to the visions and the ghosts themselves, a lot of the other visions and ghosts seem very aggressive towards Dany or dangerous somehow to her. This one, not so much. It's it kind of just fades away once it's done playing, almost like a video stopping. It fades away into a mist, and then there's Rhaegar's song keeps playing, which is presumably the Song of Ice and Fire. The actual chords to it, which is probably Jenny's song, but anyway. And this is... It's different. It's not dangerous. I'm almost wondering if the warlocks meant her to see it.
Interesting. Yeah, right.
Because everything else is so in her face, and it's really trying to draw her to do things. This isn't trying to get her to do anything. It's just an odd vision.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about the agency of the building, the warlocks, the trees, whatever this force is that's doing the visions. But you've also made a good point about how Dany has this kind of latent psychic seems too strong, but these latent kind of visionary powers of hers. Dragon dreams. Yeah. And you almost wonder if it's Dany's powers using this opportunity, using the opportunity that her doors are open. She is susceptible to all this to finally feed her this thing that she needs to see, that it's not the house, that it's her somehow, the same way she had the dream about the gemstone emperors or whatever, it's coming from this deep place within her. Which I don't know. Yeah. I think it'd be interesting to go through these and categorize, is this the house or is this Dany? Yeah.
This is as close as I got, where I just noted how Drogon also did not really have an angry reaction to this. He was just kind of watching.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point.
Let's. There's also another vision that comes up that didn't make our list because it's a really fast one. It's fake Pyat Pri.
That's right. That
was a weird one.
Yeah.
That's another one that is aggressive and going after her because it's trying to get her to walk into the room, which is in some way dangerous to her. It's It's essentially the door opens and it's the outside of the House of the Undying with a worm creature that is pretending to be Pyat Pri.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that was.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Very Doom-like.
Yeah. The idea of worms. Yeah. I mean, there's the I'm totally blanking on a source for this or whatever, but the idea of like the conqueror worm, that in the end worms will eat us all, right? Like that the worm is the conqueror because we all die and worms will eat our bodies. So worm as a word has these really interesting kind of associations with undeath and death and the afterlife and all that. Grave worms show up a lot in the series. There's the grave worm in the eye of the man at the House of Black and White that Arya plucks out and eats. And we haven't even talked about the hobo, but the hobo is really similar to the hotu in a lot of ways, you know.
And there's also fireworms.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. All of which seem to play like this really fundamental role in like the history of Targaryen magic and dragon magic. And all that.
With also what's her name? The Targaryen girl that went to Valyria and back.
Arya.
Arya, and with the fireworms that came out of her and were cooking her from the inside. Yeah. So that shows up here.
Yeah.
A talking one of those.
Yeah. I wonder if this is one of the dwellers that is referenced.
Maybe.
This worm being, this psychic worm.
I don't know. It's weird. And then we move on to there's a weird chase sequence. It's not really that important. Move on to the Splendor of Wizards, where she enters a door made of weirwood and ebony. Again, talking about the shaded evening trees and ebony, which maybe are the same thing, and weirwoods kind of fusing into one door, which we also see at Tobo Mott's. We also see the House of Black and White. The same doors, basically. Enters, and it's a Splendor of Wizards, warriors, guys with actual like pointy hats with stars on them. Just like the coolest party you've ever seen.
And very much, I mean, like you meant, I'm glad you point out the literal pointy hatted star and moon wizards, because it feels like she's walking into like a different fantasy story. You know, she's walking into like a David Eddings story or something that's really classic high fantasy,
like an elven court or something.
And you might say on the meta level, she's walking into one of the stories, the fantasy stories that George considered to be like inferior and a waste of the genre back like before he started writing Aswaf, like back when he was like, oh wait, Tad Williams is doing something very different with this. And like,
oh, we may have lost Michael. Uh-oh. I'm gonna text him real fast. He did warn me there are thunderstorms, so he might have lost power. Give me 1 second. Oof, that's bad timing. That's doesn't seem to be there. I'm gonna wait to hear back from him. Yeah, he just dropped out completely. Okay, so I can keep going with this. Hopefully he'll come back if he can. If not, thanks for joining me, Michael. I can solo stream. I can totally do this. I've done this before. We're talking about the weird party throne room full of wizards and warriors and women with like perfect Carthene breasts, that was an interesting description. But what I really, hang on. Yeah, it looks like he's losing power, so he may not come back. Okay, if he can, he will. What I actually thought about when I was seeing this particular vision along with the one that happens next is I thought very much of The Shining, because there's the scene when Jack Torrance goes into the ballroom and it's like it used to be, where everything is beautiful and all the people are the best people and everyone's partying and having a great time. And then when Wendy later goes into that same ballroom, it's essentially like what happens with the Undying to Dany here, where they turn out to be just like corpses and cobwebs and everybody's dead. But at first they all look like they're having just the greatest time in the world, which is definitely not what's happening. Oh, by the way, since Michael's not here, Guys, feel free to shoot questions because I'm gonna have to fill all the time. They try to tempt her to stay. There's a lot of temptations. They offer to teach her the teachings of dragonkind, how to speak to them. They offer her magic armor and weapons. They offer her wisdom, but for some reason, I think it's actually Drogon that alerts her that something weird is going on. Because as this is all happening, he freaks out and he flies up onto the weirwood and ebony door and starts like trying to eat it. He tries to eat wood. And as he's doing that, it kind of like breaks Dany out of whatever trance is going on, and she notices another door, a really shabby one off to the right. Oh, by the way, hang on. There's a super chat here from Vampirus99. Thank you very much for another donation. In Norse mythology, a worm is a type of dragon. Exactly right. Yeah, George loves using different words for dragons all over the place. A fireworm is a fire dragon. We may have gotten Bookshelf. Hey, he's back. That was really bad timing.
Yeah, it was like mid beautiful insight, but oh well, you know.
We're doing okay. You're gonna be all right, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, it may be wise for me to start wrapping up soon. Okay. But yeah, no, it looks like it just turned on and off a couple times.
I'm not sure what you were saying. I just sort of kept going. I was talking about how the Splendor of the Wizards versus the actual Undying remind me very much of The Shining, in particular the movie. When Jack walks into that grand ballroom and everything's like wonderful and beautiful, and it's the best party and the best people. And when Wendy walks in, it's all the corpses, it's all the dead people, it's all the ghosts. And that's kind of what's happening here. Again, I think he's referencing King a lot, especially with these two scenes right next to each other, where there's what the ghost building wants you to see and what it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, and Jack too in The Shining, when he goes into room 237 or whatever it is, 217, right, and he sees the lady in the bathtub and is tricked by her sweet hindquarters, and then he falls for it, and that's absolutely the thing that is happening with the Undying and their Splendor. Yeah, I love the Splendor of Wizards as a group noun too.
It's a good name. And I was also noting that the thing that sort of snaps Dany out of it is Drogon, because he realizes something is wrong and flies up onto the door and starts trying to eat the weirwood and the ebony. And Dany's like, why is he doing that? What's going on? And then she sees the other door, the other last door on the right, and goes through it. And then we get the actual Undying, and holy fuck.
Yeah. No, I mean, the actual Undying themselves are the creepiest physical beings we probably get in Aswaf thus far. Just on sheer like horror movie level alone. I mean, they are zombies and vampires rolled into one. They are Dwergar, and they are Dweros, and just every awful, terrible underground monster zombie thing that you can imagine.
They're really terrible. I got the quote here of Dany seeing them.
Good.
She walks in and noticed that it's all these people sitting around a very old stone table, which reminded me maybe a sacrificial altar, considering what's happening next. And they're all just sitting there, their heads back, all just staring at each other wide-eyed, not moving, not breathing, just sitting there. And okay, here we go. Through the indigo murk, she can make out the wizened features of the Undying One to her right. An old man, wrinkled and hairless. His flesh was a ripe violet blue. His lips and nails bluer still, so dark they were almost black. Even the whites of his eyes were blue. They stared unseeing at the ancient woman on the opposite side of the table, whose gown of pale silk had rotted on her body. I'm not going to... Well, actually, I'll just go for this. One withered breast was left bare in the Carthene manner to show the pointed blue nipple hard as leather. Those are that's terrifying. That's like Bloodraven levels of like, what am I looking at? Which I think is the thing that's happening here when George eventually does show us Bloodraven. He wants you to think of the Undying.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And the way too that, like, in a very physical sense, they are stained by their magic and the trees and the shade of evening and all that. They are literally turned blue. They are, in a sense, they are Smurfs. And Danny is looking at Papa Smurf when she walks in, and then he's looking at Smurfette across the table from him, with her one pointy blue nipple. No, but this physical transformation that is coupled with like the magical transformation, we do see that also with Bloodraven. You're right. Mm-hmm. The vines and shit that are growing through him. It's
fucked up.
It's visceral, it makes you feel it. If they were just old people sitting there, it's still creepy, but I don't know. There's something about that physical transformation and alteration, that the body horror that really gets you. Yeah.
They're like mummies that have been unwrapped, and they're all just sitting there. And and there's also the pulsing blue heart that you were talking about with the Red Sonja, with the blue sun thing, where it says every time it pulses, which it kind of can't do because it's almost dead, it sends out blue light which washes over them and seems to be almost sustaining them.
Yes.
I don't know. This is Black Gate level. I don't know what the hell this is.
Absolutely. I mean, I love it when George does this, when he does just kind of let his hair down and just goes for it, balls to the wall on the weird magic stuff, and doesn't try to explain it. Like I said earlier, like it's not like Danny's looking around the room and she's like, oh yes, there's a cunning system of pipes set into the wall to make this heart glow. No, it's just a glowing heart. Like,
it's
deal
glowing,
with it.
Floating heart. Just
suck it up. It is, like you said, that the idea that the light is sustaining them, that they are connected to this heart, even if not by like physical veins and vines, the way Bloodraven might be.
Same idea.
Yeah, they're connected to it via, they're the same color on the Pantone spectrum, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually the other children of the forest in Bloodraven's cave sort of look the same.
That's a good point.
They're sort of sitting there staring off into nothing, dreaming all the time. When Bran walks by, they kind of notice him, but not really. That's sort of what happens here with Dany, where they don't. It seems they're pretending not to notice her for a bit, and then they show her visions, and then they pounce and start doing weird things to her.
Yeah.
But so let's go into what they say to her.
Yeah.
Because I would say this is the second most important part of the chapter after Rhaegar's thing. They start speaking in her mind, which, they are psychics. And she's taking a hallucinogen. So it appears her third eye is open, much in the same way that Bloodraven talks to Bran. Yeah. This is what's happening. It's the same thing. Right. She's essentially dreaming while awake, I think. If that makes any sense.
No,
and they give her a bunch of names, and they call her the Mother of Dragons, Child of Three, Slayer of Lies, and the Daughter of Death. Those are not good titles.
Yeah, not really. Yeah. I think the one that's most interesting there, most of them make sense. Mother of Dragons, like, okay, check. We get that. Slayer of Lies. Maybe we don't quite get that yet, but, there's the idea that Dany will have to fight some sort of pretender to get to the throne has, I think, like, that's been around for a while. Like, George has referred to the second dance for a long time. Like, the idea that she'll have to fight a pretender to the throne is not crazy. So Slayer of Lies, like, okay, sure. Daughter of Death, like, she's the daughter of Aerys Targaryen.
That's a really bad one.
Yeah. But Child of Three is such an interesting one.
She is literally a child of three.
So I want to hear your take on it, because I have a kind of take on it, but I want to hear yours.
Well, she is the third child of Aerys and Rhaella, although the third living one. They actually had many more children that were stillborn or died shortly after birth. So in a way, she's the child of three, but not really.
Yeah,
it kind of doesn't fit that way. So it's sort of, I think it goes back to the idea of the three heads of the dragon thing, where eventually her plus John plus somebody else is going to be very important at the end game of the story, which I think is what that means.
Yeah. So, and I guess folks who can see the outline might have already seen this, but the child of three thing, I was thinking about it today, and this is not like some insight I've had for a long time. This is a new thing for me. But when the searchers arrive and find Dany in her first chapter, they introduce themselves in order: Pyat, Zaro, and Quaithe. And Pyat introduces himself in Dothraki, Zaro introduces himself in High Valyrian, and Quaithe introduces herself in the Common Tongue. And I think that's kind of an interesting take on the child of three, because Dany is, she is Valyrian by ancestry. She's got the Valyrian look. She's a Targaryen. She's a Valyrian dragon lord. She's Dothraki, though, by like her, awful forced marriage, but also she wears the bells in her hair. She's adopted a lot of the Dothraki culture and custom, and I think we'll see her continue to do that in book 6 and beyond. And she's Westerosi. She's got to come back to the Iron Throne in the end, right? Like she's pointed in that direction. And so that's kind of the riffing on a theme of like the child of three, that she really is like this confluence of different, her ancestry, her kind of immediate ancestry, like there's her magic ancestry being Valyrian. There's her more like tangible stuff, like, oh, I'm the heir to the throne. And then there's the life that she actually has, which is kind of this more, she's a SOC native. She's, comfortable with the Dothraki. She's comfortable being with people who are not Valyrian or Westerosi, basically. So I think I don't know. I mean, I have to think about this more, about it as kind of about her cultural background, and her many cultural backgrounds, I should say.
It's also interesting to note she does kind of what you're talking about. She does that during this chapter. She prays to the warrior from the Faith of the Seven. She also prays to the Dothraki horse god, and then she takes Drogon with her, which is the Valyrian form of god worship. So the three identities you're talking about do show up.
That's a great, okay, yeah, cool, right on.
Takes Drogon, leaves the other two to sit outside. You guys are allowed.
Exactly, yeah. They're the backup singers, yeah.
And then we get to the most gardening, who knows what the hell these means. I don't even know what they are. Nobody does. The three things of three that happen to her, that will happen to her, or will happen to her. There's the 3 fires she must light: 1 for life, death, and love. 3 mounts she must ride: 1 to bed, to dread, and to love. Love in all 3, by the way. And then 3 treasons you will know: blood, gold, and love.
Right. Yeah.
People have gone bananas trying to fit these to everything, and so does Dany, actually. Yeah. This is internal prophecy in the story where she does this too. Everything that happens to her, she thinks about these 9 promises that are made to her that they will happen in her life, and tries to think, which one is this?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because these are so general that you could apply them to almost any character in almost any story. Like, it's part of a story that, like, oh, you're gonna like have life and death and love, and you go to bed and you'll dread some, like, it's. But I mean, I think that's the point, right? Is that it's general enough that Dany and the reader are both going to spend a lot of time going like, how does this fit in with this? We did have a question that was submitted. Sorry, I'm talking about one of the other questions. Okay. This was one of the Patreon ones. I think this would be a good time to bring up Shar's question. Yeah.
Lady Shar's question. Do you think the prophecy of the threes came true in the show? Why or why not? Do you think it will in the books? Why or why not? Those are big questions. So I would say in the show, the way she dies is probably true, where a mount to ride, people have interpreted that not only as her horse or a dragon, but unfortunately, like, sometimes riding is a sexual thing. So riding John, she does that. He does betray her. and when he kills her at the end of the show. That's probably for love, I would say.
I mean, I think
love of Arya and Sansa, probably.
Well, and you see, sorry, just an also shout out to Kalara on Twitter, who asked that specifically about, given the show ending is the third treason for Jon Snow. But yeah, I think it almost has to be, right? Like, the treason for love is kind of, you would think by love or something, but it's also, I think you could make the argument that Jon, when he kills Dany in the books, there's a controversial statement, but that it will be because, partially, like you said, like love for Arya and Sansa, but also because he loves Dany, and he's like so hurt to see her going down this like very dark path, and like he in this. I'm not trying to defend him killing her in any way, but rather to say that like it will be born out of like this really complicated love for Dany, and love that she has for him, and all that. And so I think, I definitely think it's Jon. I also think, I mean, like the fires she must light, the one for life, you could argue, is the dragons.
Most people think that one's already happened.
Yeah, the one for love could be,
it's Drogo.
You think that one's Drogo? See,
no, I'm sorry. I'm wrong. Sorry. Go ahead.
I kind of think it'll be like at the end of the long night battle in the show, when they light those big pyres with all the like she lights Jorah, who arguably loved her, or whatever. Yes. I mean, yeah, he loved her. Like, if Jorah has a concept of love, I guess
whatever it is.
Yeah. But so I mean. Yeah, they're so general. You can really stretch these.
And then the fire for death. The explanation of why she lit up King's Landing was basically she burned that city so she wouldn't have to burn the others. It was supposed to be her deterrent going forwards, that I'll do to you what I did to King's Landing. That's basically what she says to Jon too. It's like, Sansa, what will happen? Or somebody says this to Jon, like, what will Sansa think when she hears about what happened to King's Landing? She'll open the gates, and she'll then need to. And that's basically the explanation. It's the Stannis idea of what is, killing a small amount of people relatively to avoid killing the larger amount, which in this case, King's Landing's huge, but compared to the rest of the world, if she has to go city to city burning it, which she seems to think like she does, at least in the show, she'll probably get there in the books too. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. It's terrible logic and it's horrible, but it's also does make a degree of utilitarian sense.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point on the fire for death. Definitely.
They will come true. I mean, treason for gold. A lot of people have thought that's maybe Castor the Rock, or someone's going to get paid off. She constantly thinks about the treason for gold. She suspects everybody. Yeah. She's like, is this the one? Is this the person that's going to be paid to go against me? She thinks about, I think, with Dario about this a lot.
Definitely. And Brown Ben Plum. I mean, I think it'd be interesting, people have talked about with the Maggie the Frog prophecy, how the gold could relate to hair color and not just, gold.
It's like so cards. It can be whatever you want.
Yeah. And so, if like Tyrion steals a dragon so he can attack Cersei on his own, even though Dany wants to go north. Well, that's a treason for gold, because Tyrion's going after the blonde like crazy. You can really fit those in any way. I think the important thing about like the treasons in particular is that Dany won't necessarily see any of them. Like anyone she suspects, we should be suspicious of. Not suspicious of in the sense like, oh, they're going to betray her, but suspicious of in the sense of like, that can't be who it's going to be. Because
if she thinks it won't be.
Yes, exactly.
You can cross them off the list.
Exactly, yeah. So it'll be in the book, Missandei is a faceless man. No.
Yeah, of course. People do think Missandei's one of them. For love, because the book version of Missandei, her brother is one of the captains of the Unsullied.
Yeah.
So people think that might come up at some point where maybe Dany orders him to his death, and Missandei thinks her brother's more important than Khaleesi or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think by far the most important part of these these three triarchs, I guess that would be triptychs, something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
triptychs.
Whatever
Triptychs,
whatever the word is. I think the most important part is that they're always on Dany's mind, and that not in like a madness Aries way, but in sort of she doesn't tell anybody she's doing this. This is just like a background in her head all the time. She sees foes everywhere. She's seeing betrayals coming. She's seeing treasons, and in some way, it makes her a lot more paranoid than she might ever have been had she not heard them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the reason, arguably, that George included Cersei in A Feast for Crows, and not only included Cersei, but introduced this idea of the Valonqar prophecy and all that, which we had never heard of before. But it's to give us this alternate perspective on one of our actual protagonists. You know, I mean, like it or not, our real protagonists are basically the big five, like Jon, Dany, Bran, Tyrion, Sansa, Arya, and everyone else is there to give us a different lens through which to look at these big five. And yeah, Cersei going nuts because of a prophecy and how general it is and vague, and she's trying to make it come true, or, you know, trying to like
avoid it.
Yeah. Absolutely is like a cautionary tale for Daenerys, and is meant to give us pause and think like, oh yeah, Dany, you're really going down a Cersei road here.
Except she never thinks they're wrong. She never goes like, huh. She instantly goes like, okay, so which one's which? She believes the Undying when they tell her this. And I think that's something where other characters who hear prophecy about them or have been cautioned against it, like in particular, Jon has been told over and over again that magic and prophecy are bad things, that don't listen to them. And Dany's not getting that. Instead, she's embracing it. And that's may be one of kind of her downfalls, which connects to Valyria, where their downfall was their magic and their reliance on it. And Dany's unfortunately going towards her own doom in like a metaphorical sense, but like in a real one, where she is going to be a tragic heroine, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. The the way like we talked about earlier, like the way she's a believing herself to be a traditional fantasy protagonist, that she can find the prophecy that says that she's the chosen one,
and she's trying to find it real hard. And at that point, then something weird happens where Dany gets kind of frustrated at the vagueness of these things, and she's like, "Give me information, like give me something real." And all of a sudden, out of the blue murk, all these visions start flashing in front of her, and a lot of them have been kind of decoded, I think, correctly, that George was gardening at the beginning and then worked backwards to make out what they were. But in order, they're Viserys dying, Rhaego, if he had lived, which is a very strange one, a different timeline, Rhaego, a blue-eyed king who casts no shadow with a red sword. Most people think that's Stannis. He's noted to have blue eyes. Cloth dragging a cheering crowd that most people think that's Aegon, the fake one. Aegon the sixth. Aegon the sixth.
Because Jon will be Aegon the seventh.
Yeah, that's right. A stone beast flying from a smoking tower, breathing shadows. Nobody knows what that one is. That one's very ambiguous.
Yeah.
Dany's silver horse striding to a stream. I think that's supposed to foreshadow her going into the Dothraki Sea with her unfortunate dysentery. That's supposed to be her walking through the grass, I guess, because that scene does happen to her personally.
That could be, yeah. It's also, isn't that her wedding night though? Is her?
It could be. It could go either way. Who the hell knows?
Yeah.
There's a white lion in the grass, and this is one thing they cut out of the show. She wears a giant white lion pelt.
Yeah,
and she looks badass.
Yeah, it's also Tyrion, arguably, because he's got that really pale blonde hair. Yeah.
There's a man being dragged behind horses to his death, which is the wine cellar that's coming up. No, that already happened.
Oh yeah.
Book one.
Happened. Yeah, long ago.
Then there's the very curious one, which I talked about at the beginning, and I think we'll finish with this because of Porkland's amazing essay on it today. Yes. The corpse on the prow of a ship with bright eyes and gray lips. Most people assume that's Euron Greyjoy, and I would agree. And then the final one, tying back to the Song of Ice and Fire, the blue flower and a chink in the wall of ice, which most people believe, and I think correctly, that is supposed to be Jon Snow with Lyanna's favorite flower coming out of the wall of ice, where
filling the air with sweetness as well, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the interesting, if you want to get all kind of numerological on these, there's 9 of these visions. There are 9 total, like if you do the 3 fires, 3 mouths, and 3 treasons, that's 9 things as well. So people have tried to slot them in to see if they all kind of fit. I don't think they do.
Not
but
really.
what is interesting, I think, is the way you can kind of find a pattern in the alternation here, where it has Viserys dying, and then a possible great king, and then Rhaegar dying, and then a possible great king.
Rhaegar dying too. That was in there.
Yeah, right. Rhaegar dying after Rhaego's Rhaego. Yeah.
You see him getting his chest crushed in, and him saying what George has confirmed is Lyanna's name as he dies.
Yeah.
Sorry, I fucked up your flow.
No, you're fine. But so you've got Viserys' death, Rhaego's a great king and conqueror's possible future. You've got Rhaegar's death, and then Stannis's possible future, like great king and conqueror. You've got Aegon VI, not his death, but you've got
him winning.
This interesting image, yeah. And then following that, you have a stone beast flying from a smoking tower, breathing shadows. Yeah, I mean, it's really it's really weird the way that worked. But if I can riff on the destruction of King's Landing in the show a little, the stone beast flying from a smoking tower, breathing shadows, could absolutely be Drogon laying waste to King's Landing, I think.
Yeah.
The dragons wake from stone. That's Dany's. I mean, that's what Melisandre's trying to do.
Yes.
But it's what Dany actually does in book 1. She wakes the dragons from stone.
Yes.
And I think that is what, that's what we're supposed to see as like, the dramatic irony in what Mel is trying to do, is that it's already happened and she had no control over it.
Mel. And then the other weird thing is the dragons, all their fire colors are different. I don't think, is Drogon's not black, is it? Balerion's was.
Balerion's was black. I don't remember. I think Drogon's might just be straight up fire, but I want to.
Mallory, yeah, this.
That's right. Yeah.
Mallory, are you in the chat?
yeah.
Let me see if I can grab this. He shoots. His flame is black, fire shot with red. So I guess that could be shadows if you wanted it to be.
Breathing shadows, sure. Yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah, I think there's
that could be the destruction of King's Landing, definitely.
Right. And the destruction of King's Landing, with regard to the vision that just came before it of Aegon VI, the cloth dragon and the cheering crowd, because you have the cloth dragon superimposed against the stone beast, like the real dragon. Yeah, and so I don't know. I think there's some patterns you can look for there, and then there's the next 3 that come after that, which are her silver horse, the white lion in the grass, and the man dragged behind the horses, are kind of her arc in a Game of Thrones. Definitely. I think that it traces that. And then, just before we get to Jon Snow's sweet ass smelling armpits, we get
fucking Greyjoy.
Yeah, what the fuck is up with that? Corpse on the prow of a ship, bright eyes, gray lips.
Is a black bright eye.
Yeah, bright and shining with malice.
Yeah.
He a corpse on the prow of a ship is an interesting. If I remember right, isn't the Ghost of Highheart, when she has the vision of Balon's death, isn't a corpse standing on the bridge? Or am I totally conflating that? I'm gonna have to look that up.
You're gonna have to look that up. I don't remember. It could also be Aeron Greyjoy, where this does actually happen to him.
Yep. And the gray lips. Yeah, the gray lips would suggest. I mean, who knows if George had thought of Euron hijacking the warlocks yet? But
interesting. From Leaf Underhill, they think it may be John Con, that it's the grayscale. I think it's more likely to be one of the Greyjoys, because we're going to talk about this in a few minutes to round out the stream. But this is heavily about Euron as well, which is not obvious, I think, on the first reading. And poor Quentin made a great argument in his essay today, talking about how Euron has been showing up almost since the beginning, but in ways you didn't realize.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, so the Ghost of Highheart thing that I was conflating there, it's the drowned crow on the shoulder of the man with no face. And so I think that the idea that he's a drowned man, that he's a corpse, like he's dead and is come to life, like it is the Grey King, isn't it?
Oh, Amanda coming through with the Grey King.
Yeah. It absolutely is.
I'm shocked you had that comment.
No, I mean it is. Euron is. Yeah, the gray lips thing, I think is just an evocation of Greyjoy, but also could be a vision of
his blue lips.
His blue and bruised lips. Yeah,
because he wants to bring about like the Eldritch Apocalypse, at which point there would be no light, so his blue lips would probably look gray. If you wanted to be really weird about it, it's probably he hadn't decided that Euron had blue lips at that point.
That's kind of what I'm. That's kind of what I'm wondering. Yeah. And
then Jon, of course.
Right, and then Jon is the last vision for sure. Right,
linking
because he's the one who
Euron
kills her.
Jon.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, so I think that's a way to kind of group those, break them up a little bit. In that the last two, kind of are call and response to each other. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That you have these back and forth with a death, a Targaryen death, a potential king, a Targaryen death, a potential king, a Targaryen victory, and then Dany destroying that, and then you have her Game of Thrones arc, and then you have these two paired figures, the corpse and the blue flower.
Two probable kings as well.
Yeah, and two people who will go head to head around Daenerys, I think. Even if maybe not direct, like I don't know if Jon will duel Euron necessarily, or whatever, but just that, like, they will be competing in some way for Daenerys and the power that she has. Now, with all that being said about Euron, I think Amanda makes a really good point in chat that the corpse at the prow of the ship smiles sadly, which really is not a Euron thing.
No.
Euron cackles and chortles and sneers and all that kind of stuff, but he doesn't really smile sadly.
No.
I go back and forth on that. That part of me feels like there's some of the Gardner retcon tendencies here, where
probably.
George had never written Euron before and didn't know anything about him. So if he's trying to depict a character he's never written, he might write that and then later throw it out. With that being said, I don't think that I'm not saying that like, oh, it's Euron and everyone else is wrong. Like I think it's worth thinking about why there is that incongruity there. Yeah, for sure.
It could also be Aeron Greyjoy. He fits really well in the Forsaken chapter. This is basically what happens to him.
Mm-hmm.
But like you were talking about, with a high magical character that hasn't appeared yet and George writing backwards to it, that happens with Bloodraven, where the early descriptions of him, and in particular, he doesn't show up in the Hedge Knight at all, when he definitely should have, based on his position in the kingdom at that time.
Right.
He's such a looming figure.
Yeah.
So he had to do some retcons as he introduced these characters later after hyping them up. He didn't even know who Bloodraven was for a while. He just knew he was basically just a Targaryen in a tree. Later figured out he was a Blackwood. Later figured out he was a child of Aegon IV, etc., etc., etc. So,
yeah, right. So yeah, like when the three-eyed crow is popping up in Brand 3, A Game of Thrones, like George didn't know that was Brynden Rivers, who loved Shara Seastar and was the child of like he didn't know all that shit. He just knew like vaguely. So I think that's kind of I think that's kind of a fitting way to wrap up a House of the Undying discussion. Is that when we talk about like visions and stuff in the books, we have to marry that with the idea that George, he knows where he's going, but also these little details and things sometimes are going to be different. Like we talked about with Robb presiding over the Feast of Corpses. Maybe that's a metaphor. Maybe it's George realizing when he's writing book 3 that Robb isn't going to preside over the feast, and that's fine. Like it's okay to have that incongruity there. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that kind of has to be kept in mind when we talk about the House of the Undying visions.
I think that that applies to all of them, where they're going to mean something eventually, but I would have a very hard time predicting them exactly what they're going to be. And Well, let's wrap up with some Euron Greyjoy talk, because
Okay.
he is, I would say, well, the house itself is the antagonist of this entire story. The House of the Undying, the Palace of Dust, where it very much wants to take Dany. Oh, we didn't even get to this part. The Undying then attack her and try and eat her.
Oh yeah.
Drogon, they lick her eyeball with the lick her eyeball. They bite her neck, go after her nipples. George likes nipples for some reason, and then Drogon freaks out, burns the heart. They fall to pieces. She runs out, and all the doors are gone, meaning that maybe that's the true House of the Undying, that the Shady Evening has worn off and there never were any doors. It was all in her head. That could be true. Runs outside, Pyat freaks out, house burns down.
He hops
but I think the more important part is, like you were talking about earlier, they were vampiric, they were cannibalistic. They were going to sacrifice her on that table and somehow fuel themselves. It was all an elaborate trap to get her to stay, which they claim they've been setting up for 1,000 years, that they sent the comet in order to attract her there. And that is very strange on the whole. I mean, we're not going to get into this, who are the Undying, where'd they come from, that kind of stuff. The important part is that they show her extreme malice, and everything except Rhaegar's vision wants her to stay, is trying to pull her into the house and have her basically stay there forever. They put this in the show where they actually have Pyat stay. Basically, you'll stay here forever. Essentially, it's like their power source.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. They made it very explicit in the show. That whole thing about like their master plan to capture her because she is this promised figure. I think everything we learned later about like how unreliable prophecy and magic is, like when we see it through Melisandre's eyes and all that, we shouldn't take the Undying at their word that Daenerys was the person that they were waiting 1,000 years for. Like if they were waiting 1,000 years to kidnap and eat somebody, it's entirely possible they still got the wrong person, even though they picked this magical, like this person who hatched 3 dragons. Like they were trying to kidnap Bran, and instead they kidnapped a woman with flamethrower beasts. Like,
I mean, their plan failed. They waited 1,000 years and they said, you can bring the dragon, I guess.
Oh my God, man.
Fuck that one up. Even though they had this grandmaster plan. And I think this links back with Euron, because a lot of people think that his master plan is Dany as well. That he's going to try and claim the dragons, which he says as well. He says to Victarion, go get my wife, bring her to me. He has Dragonbinder. He's been to Valyria. And also, he evokes the House of the Undying physically. He has the shining bright eyes, which show up in the vision of the corpse on the thing. He has the blue lips of a warlock, because he claims he captured them and has been binging Shady Evening. But we note that after one time was not enough for Dany to get fully blue lips. So Euron may be lying about that. He may be drinking it all this time.
I mean, he found a cask or something with them, right?
That may not be enough, considering those guys have been drinking it forever and they're blue, and then their lips look the same. He also he has the things that the Undying promised her. He has the magic weapon. He has the magic armor. He has wisdom. He apparently thinks he can maybe talk to dragons through the horn. It's like the House of the Undying, after she burned it to the ground, came back to life through Euron, and it's still coming for her as this like dark destiny.
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. I mean, everyone should go read Emmett's essay, by the way. Like everyone should go read Poor Quentin's essay on this. But we're talking about people who think they're fantasy heroes. I mean, Euron, I don't know if he thinks he's a hero. I feel like he's pretty comfortable in his villainy, but like, he absolutely believes he's a destined figure. And he's putting on, like you said, all the trappings of that: the magic armor, the horn, the lips of a warlock, and the magic eye, and the all of these things, all these pieces. He's like, if you take Bran and Dany and their shadow versions of them, and maybe Jon too, because he's a bit of a warrior, and he's the shadow of Bran and Jon and Daenerys. And absolutely, you're right that like the warlocks and the House of the Undying are kind of born again through him. You know, they leave Karth trying to get revenge on Dany. It doesn't come in the form maybe that they thought it would, but they absolutely have ended up empowering Euron in a new and fun way.
Yeah, he used to just be like a murdering creep and a pirate, and he apparently has taken a whole nother level. There's also the oh, hang on, let me grab this. There's also the fan theory that Urgon Nightwalker, who's apparently from Karth and has a glass candle. Most people think that is actually Euron. That that is his fake Karthian name.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, that's his alias.
Was it Uragon?
Urathon.
Urathon. I'm sorry, it says Uragon. Urathon, bad brother. That's what it's referencing, and he is the bad brother in this scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, that Urathon, the name only shows up one other time in the series, and it's this very specific historical Greyjoy figure who happens to
like him.
Who happens to look just like him. Thank you, Bernie. Can you put that one on the screen? I heard Euron has a magic brown eye.
I have to wait for that one to show up. There we go. Okay, and then it's off.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Bernie.
No, yeah, but I definitely. I feel like I'm 75% in on the Urathon Nightwalker theory.
I think it's pretty well there. It just needs more evidence.
Yeah.
The naming convention's really good. The connections with the story's really good. The fact that Euron isn't interested in magic the whole time and that he probably has been to Karth, that makes sense.
Yep.
That he would take up a fake identity to sneak into a city. Sure, why not?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I think it does make a lot of sense, and that he has these glass candles and has already been tapping into magic in a way. Yeah, to me that definitely vibes, and it vibes with what we see of Euron as he walks onto the page later.
Walks on the page and makes a beeline for Dany.
Yep.
It's and as Emmett said in his awesome essay, if somebody has the link for that, if they could drop that in the chat so people can read it.
I think I can do that. But
it's really interesting just how much all of his goals line up with the Undying. Like, not necessarily the warlocks, not Pyat Pri, but the actual Undying, that they want to take Dany's power and cannibalize it for themselves, that they want to entrap her with promises of wisdom and amazing things. And she actually asked them for the ability to live forever. Euron is such a Lovecraftian character. A big part of Lovecraft is all these people that give themselves over to the old ones or the great ones or whatever, or the creatures from outer space, do so pretty much under the idea that they're going to live forever somehow. So it's not inconceivable that Euron could make the same kind of promise. They seem one-to-one. It's like the building got up and became a person, I would say. It's that kind of evil.
Yeah. No, I think, that's a great connection. Yeah. Euron is definitely, he's got that spirit, the House of the Undying in him.
And love of prophecy.
Yeah, right. He takes it seriously. He's a big nerd, and he thinks he's hot stuff. Basically.
So I think we've been about 2 hours on the House of the Undying on Halloween.
That's right.
If you guys have any last questions you want to throw in the chat, I'm going to grab maybe one or two more from our document, because I think we haven't gotten this and then I think we will call it a night. But yeah, every bit as creepy as the Night Fort, even creepier, I would say, because I would say the House of the Undying is basically the Night Fort as it's described in legends.
Right.
Like, if it was actually still inhabited, I think it would be almost exactly the House of the Undying, with all the crazy things that happen there, and the murders and the people going missing, the blue heart to the weirwood face. Yeah, I think it's all one-to-one. I think they're basically the same kind of ancient, horrible building.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, an ancient Winchester house.
Yeah, ancient Winchester house, and right out of Lovecraft. So one hearing from one of my patrons, Erin. She's actually in the chat as well. In conjunction with your last video, Heron, do you think Dany released a bunch of the stored magic into the world when she burned the House of the Undying, and that's why the glass candles are burning in the House of Urathon Nightwalker? They've not burned in 100 years. Were the Undying hoarding it to keep them alive? Definitely. I think that's absolutely something that's happening. Karth, Ashai, the Wall, Valyria, the Roinar, they seem to be essentially accumulating magic and holding it for themselves and eventually destroying themselves. Like Karth used to not be surrounded by a desert in the Red Waste. There were cities there. The outside of the Karthine walls show lush forests that aren't there anymore. So the Undying, their cannibalistic nature is kind of what's true about magic in George's world, that in order to have power, you have to take it from something. And it's usually other people, but it can be the natural world. So by killing the Undying, even though they seem to have come back to life in Euron, again, because they're Undying, duh.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Amazing connection by Matt there. But yeah, I would say that the less magic users there are like the Undying in the world, the more likely it is to go back to what it used to be.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting connection, too, to be drawn with the Undying and the Alchemist Guild in the same book, where their power... the Undying are after Dany because they want to suck her magic blood and, like, all that kind of stuff. That really wonderful things. But it's her power. Like, it's the power of prophecy and all that kind of stuff that they're looking for. And the Alchemist Guild is regaining their magic power to make wildfire somehow as well, like at the same time. And they are like tapping into this new vein of magic that Daenerys is definitely it's like if the magic was like bottled up inside of a large bottle, Dany like shook it up and like flicked the cap off, and then like the Undying are getting like garbled in the face, and like the Alchemist Guild or I think totally it's Daenerys is somehow unlocking this magic as she goes along.
Yeah, they seem to feed directly on magic, which is what the heart seems to be doing. So if she is the most magical character, then she probably is like there's a phrase from the books where it's like, or no, I think it's from Lovecraft, like one light in the darkness, where she is ablaze and the rest of the magical world all of a sudden snap to look at her. Like, what's that over there? And they're all trying to get it. Euron, the Undying, the Alchemists, seemingly maybe even the Faceless Men, the Weirwood trees, they all notice she's back, that she's brought the dragons back. So I think those two work very well together with that video.
Yeah, Backstreet's back. Yeah.
All right. Did you want to grab one more question? Or do you think are you ready to hit the...
Well, in the interest of not losing power and like destroying my computer, we should probably start wrapping up.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. This has been the House of the Undying. I honestly, I didn't think going into this think there would be this much to talk about with it, where it seems like the fandom has kind of wrapped it up, where they figured out the clues, where they're going, what are the important parts, but you keep going through it, and it's much like George's typical style. It's multi-layered. There's more to find. There's more connections. There's hints to things that he used later, and kind of like almost like the Waymar chapter, that these are similar length, and I would say they're similar density in terms of very important chapters, but it takes a little while to get all of them to come through.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like everyone, I think, everyone remembers the House of the Undying chapter after they read it. They're like, oh yeah, that was a crazy one with the visions, and then it does get a lot of attention, like talking about the visions and stuff like that. But I think there's a lot to tap into aside from just like, oh, who are the three treasons going to be? Who are the, like, why the Undying are seeing these things? Prophecy and magic are never objective in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's never just someone getting to see something because, like, why not? Like, she sees Aerys Targaryen with this objective security camera footage view, but why? Like, why is she being shown that? Is it being pulled out of her brain? Like, and I think the great thing about the story is it rewards those questions. Like, if you ask why, there's actually, you can scratch the surface and there's something there. So, yeah, House of the Undying chapter is the gift that keeps on giving.
Not a gift that I think most people would go to as like, oh my god, oh, another, sure, Aaron.
Let's do it.
Taking a shot of the House of the Undying vision. Don't worry, it's not very alcoholic. It's a weak mixed drink. It's fine.
Good.
All right, here we go.
Bon chance. Yeah, baby.
Gonna unstop my ears and my eyes.
Sweet, sweet mother's milk.
I think this works pretty well because you said Nauticast is getting to this one soon.
Well, yeah, so they just did Danny 1, so it'll be about a year and a half. No, I don't know. Yeah, but I mean, I will also shout out. I mean, this is like 2 Emmett things we've shouted out, but what can I say? He's Emmett.
He's really good.
But they did just do their episode with Mighty Isabel talking about Danny 1. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I think that it really bears comparing Danny 1 to whatever this is, Danny 4 or whatever. Mm-hmm. That her first and her House of the Undying chapter have a lot in conversation. So, yeah.
There's a lot of different ways to take this chapter. I mean, we looked at it really from the spooky horror, Lovecraft, The Shining, that kind of angle, and like looking at the ghosts and what they're doing, what does the house want, and that kind of stuff. But don't stop there. This is a very rewarding chapter if you want to give it a shot.
Definitely.
Oof. All right. So I think we are just about to wrap up. As usual, thank you guys for showing up. Got over 100 tonight on Halloween night. That was pretty cool. Thanks for everybody that came. Gave super chat money. Tip of the cap again to my lovely patrons who submitted awesome questions for us to talk about, including let's see here, Stephen, Aaron, Lady Shar, and Zombie Jesus. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/JoeMagician. Sign up there. All sorts of different rewards for stuff for different levels. Next video, I'm gonna keep going with this kind of vein. I'm gonna be talking the next one. I'm going to call it, I think, Westerosi horror story Dragonstone. Take on American Horror Story.
All
and
right.
then be talking about Andrew Farman's bloody rampage. Well, not really bloody. He poisoned everybody in fire and blood on Dragonstone, trying to get revenge on Rhaena or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a hard look at what's going on with Andrew Farman, and maybe he's not the one that's responsible for this. Maybe there's somebody else that pushed him. Some reason wanted the island of Dragonstone poisoned, in particular Rhaena. So we'll see about that one. It'll be a fun one. I might do a news video about the prequels and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I might do that like in the next couple of days. Mr. Monthly, we were talking about doing it maybe next week or something like that. After more information comes out. New information is coming out all the time. George just dropped a blog post.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time. We will all take a shot of Shade of the Evening and try to see what's going to happen with the House of the Dragon prequel, which is of course pronounced Hot D.
Hot D, that's right.
Yeah.
The Hot D.
Hot D. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on as always.
Wait, why do I still have Aaron's thing still up?
It's been a joy. I enjoyed having it on the screen. I thought it fit the tone very nicely.
Oh, okay.
No, but thank you. Seriously, this was a blast. I can't think of a better way to spend Halloween than to get spooked talking about spooky asswaff chapters.
The crazy haunted houses of Westeros. There's more. We only covered 2 so far.
We've got some years ahead of us on this tradition.
George loves haunted houses. He loves haunted castles. There'll always be more. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Enjoy your candy that you're going to steal from your kids, like I know you're going to. And good night.
Peace out.